Ken Kilbride is the CEO of ADHD Ireland, and he can be found speaking tirelessly almost everywhere in all kinds of media about the needs and the services required to help people with ADHD and help them be successful really in their lives moving forward. I get a chance to speak to Ken about his experiences, how he became the CEO, what drives him in pushing for the needs of ADHD people, and what ADHD Ireland plans to do and hopes to do in the future. Enjoy. So Ken, I'm excited to do this one today because I know you've been heavily involved in ADHD Ireland for a while. I've met you as an ADHDer, and I've followed you even prior to any diagnosis. Mine was late. But what I'd like to know, because you're obviously quite passionate about it, then how did you get to be in the role that you're in with ADHD Ireland?
Well, it's great to be here, but forgive me for the long sort of little bit of story to introduce all that. So I've been working in the not-for-profit sector for about 30 years. And when I was finished the role in 2014, I started working in the Carmichael Centre. So the Carmichael Centre is Ireland's largest shared service centre for charities. And one of the charities in the Carmichael Centre is ADHD Ireland. So part of my role there was they were looking for a new chief executive. So not only did I advertise the position for them, but I applied for it as well. So because they knew me, and we'd also have a child at home with autism, also has a co-diagnosis of ADHD, they felt I obviously had, the interest and, passion for the area. So I've been in the role since February 2017.
So you saw it through then the COVID times and all of the remote work difficulties, and because I know for me when I first got to know ADHD Ireland was actually during COVID and was very heavily reliant on some of the resources that you and your team had put in place, but we'll get back into those I guess in a few minutes. And one of the questions I'd really like to ask is your thoughts on the support services for people with ADHD in Ireland. What do you think of the current state of those, or what do you think is needed improvements wise?
Well, again, in terms of the way ADHD Ireland works, our mission is to make life better for people with ADHD. So, that covers a broad spectrum of areas. So, again, when we're looking at initiatives and we say, will this work and will this make life better for people with ADHD? Do we have the resources and the time to do it? Well, then we do it. But the basic partnership we have with the HSE is they will provide the assessment and treatment, which is the medicalised side of it. And we provide what's called the psychosocial supports. So that's the support groups, the parenting courses, the adult courses, the awareness talks, the webinars, and all those other activities. But what we find is at the minute, when I started 7 years ago, for ADHD Ireland's perspective, the association was 100% focused on children. There wasn't any focus on adults, either in ADHD Ireland or with the HSE. Now, we've been working with the HSE over the last number of years. Now, we haven't got to a place where, it's fully formed. But, we are getting to a place that's better than certainly was 5 years ago. So we now have, 5 or 6 adult clinics around the country, and there's more planned. We've always had CAMS in Ireland, which is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. And that's for children from basically 6 or upwards to the ages of 18. And the name is, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. So it's children with mental health challenges. ADHD fits under their umbrella. Now, there is a slight, not argument, but it's a question of definition. We want services. What the name of the organisation is doesn't necessarily mean, but what they're doing is they're classifying it as a mental health illness, which we have a challenge with because it's something that you're born with. So certainly, we see it, maybe it's not in the right place, but it's great that it is getting some sort of a recognition within the CAM service. Now, within the CAM service, and we know that, maybe 30 to 50% of all children going through the CAM service are there for ADHD assessment and treatment.
That's a lot.
But we also know that CAM services are underfunded, and they have been underfunded since 2008. And the challenge there is that, that there's always a psychiatrist leading the team, which means there's always someone to prescribe the medication. But there's not always someone there to do what's called the multimodal treatment, which is apart from medication, the behavioural management, the OT, the speech and language therapy, and other therapies like that as well. And so certainly we do have a service here in Ireland for people with ADHD, for children and for adults, but it's not at the level it needs to be. So one of our missions is to get it to that point where people get the service they need when they need it.
That's fair, I think. And I mean, there's a lot of hype, I guess, in the media about there being more people with ADHD, which I know I have my own feelings about with regards. I think they've always had it. It's not that they've suddenly discovered it.
That's it.
Yes, they just didn't have the resources. I mean, I'm 45 now. I was 43 when I was diagnosed, and just talking about the resources outside of the HSE, then the ones that ADHD Ireland offers. I know from my experience, I got a place on the UMAP course, which was a game changer with regards approaching everything from the emotional side of it to the functional side of it, and just learning how to kind of understand it and take time and even breathe. And that sounds really daft, but it wouldn't have been something that would have been easy to do prior to doing the course and understanding more about it. And I know that you offer a lot of group supports as well. I know I've been involved in the adult ADHD online groups and listened in. Yeah, they've been fantastic, and I've seen you on them myself. And I get the emails about all the rest of them for transitioning from primary to secondary, for young kids, teenagers, adults, for men only, for women only. You really kind of cater for everything. Is there anything that you're offering that you find that you could just offer more and more and more, and people would never get enough of it? What's the most in demand as such on your side of things?
Well, forgive me, but there's a global answer to that, and the simple answer is everything. I'm not just saying that from just to make us sound good, but we've been saying that particularly since COVID. Everything we put up sells out. Well, not really sells out, but because we don't charge for things. But the spaces go. Everything's oversubscribed. We could run twice the amounts we are running, and I think we still be oversubscribed. So it's getting just more facilities to do more is our challenge. Again, like you were saying there, we started off with the in-person support group here in Dublin 7 years ago. Then obviously COVID hit, so we moved that online, and that went huge in terms of Ireland. And then what happened within that, women said, "Look, I mean, ADHD is different for us. Could we have our own support group?" So we started doing a support group for women. 2 years later, the men knows, "Hey, the women have their own group, and we have our own group." So we've a known support group for them. We've one for parents of children who are over 18. And that's huge. I mean, that sells out every month. Yeah, it sells out. Not forgive me, I keep on using the word sells out. But it keeps getting booked out quicker than any other one. And we have one for partners of adults who have ADHD.
That's an important one, actually. Yeah, I know my husband. It was quite a bit of an adjustment for him.
Yes.
Now that it was all validated, and actually, speaking of validation, one thing I learned from being at those support groups is that you don't have to have the piece of paper or the formal diagnosis, which I was really pleased to see that that was just as valid, that you don't have to have, because it's so difficult to get a diagnosis or get, to do it in any reasonable amount of time, I guess. It was really important to me. I remember at the time that people could do that, whether they've got the formal diagnosis or not.
Yeah, well, just in terms of the background around that, so again, in terms of the research, so the research would say ADHD is a prevalence of about 5% for children, and it would say about 3.5% of adults will continue to meet the clinical criteria for ADHD into adulthood. Now, the important part for us in that sentence is clinical criteria. They still have ADHD.
Yeah.
Even if they are learning to manage it and they no longer meet the clinical criteria, they're still doing things on a daily basis and putting in hit strategies so they can get through their day. So for our view is that it's 5% of children, 5% of adults. whether they meet the clinical criteria or not, they have ADHD.
Yeah.
So
The math.
again, yeah, well, that's what I mean. Yeah. So, and the maths on that works out about, looking at, the current figures in the sense, is about 250,000 people in Ireland.
Yeah.
But in that, you're probably looking at maybe 170,000 adults, again, 60 or 70,000 children. So there's far more adults out there in Ireland today with undiagnosed, untreated ADHD than there are children. And that point is, that it's only in the last number of years that the HSE has started delivering services for adults. And there was never a huge amount of people doing it privately. So, out of those 170,000, maybe 10, 15,000 we're getting an assessment. And even today, it's a challenge getting the assessment.
Yeah.
So for us to say, if we were going to deliver services for, people with ADHD, including adults, we couldn't put up saying, you need to bring along a piece of paper to get in.
No, God, no. But like say, and I think for me, it's probably the thing I spoke about the most when I became a member of it as such, because I knew of a lot of people who didn't seek services because they didn't think they had the right to without that validation. So I think it's just so important to just even say it out loud. And obviously public awareness has improved somewhat globally, even around ADHD. But with regards the ADHD in Ireland, do you think that the campaigns that are out there at the moment are doing enough? Or is there more that we can do to improve that kind of public understanding of ADHD and what it is and how it works?
I had a look when I was, chatting there and looking through what we were going to have a chat about, and I saw that. I have a little bit of difficulty in the way that's framed, to be honest, in that I don't know of any campaigns out there. Yeah, I come from a marketing background, so a campaign is where you're putting ads on telly, ads on posters, radio ads and stuff like that, and creating national awareness. There's nothing happening like that for ADHD.
That's fair, actually. That is fair. Anything I've seen has been, and as an adult, I'm heavily invested, I guess, on the LinkedIn side of things. So I will see a lot of it, but I realize that actually a lot of that is tailored to what it is that I like to watch. So, and I don't actually watch traditional television anymore. So, so then no campaigns. And do you think that kind of thing would be, it feels like a stupid question. Do you think it would be useful? We should be approaching that and normalizing it like we would do with any other like flu campaign or when we did the COVID campaigns and stuff, so that people know more about it?
Well, see, that I would fully go along that lines myself. And now I know I'm slightly biased in that, I do come from a marketing background, and I do have some history and experience in developing those type of campaigns. And so in terms of changing culture, awareness and acceptance around a condition like ADHD, I think, we do need, ads on buses, ads on the radio, things on television, to normalize it, and for people to understand what ADHD is. So certainly I would love to go down that road, but, I know from experience, you're looking at maybe 1 to 2 million euros a year to fund a campaign at that level. And I'm not just saying, but ADHD Ireland certainly does not have resources to do that. And so again, one of the things, my little back pocket list of things to do is, could we find someone who would give us 10 million euros? If only, yeah. And the logic for that behind for me is that our mission is to make life better for people with ADHD. And when I'm doing talks, and we're getting to do more and more talks all the time, is that one of the things I will always say that the biggest challenge with ADHD is not the ADHD itself, it's the public perception and the stigma around the condition. And I fully believe that with a proper above the line what's called campaign and awareness around ADHD to remove that stigma and create that acceptance, would be the best thing you could probably do for people with ADHD.
Absolutely. The more normalized it is, and normal being the funny word to use for it, but the more normalized it is, the better. And somebody said to me once, like an ADHD or a neurodiverse friendly workplace, school place, world is an everybody friendly world. Like there's nothing that you're going to put in place for someone who's neurodiverse that's going to really make anyone else feel excluded if they had the same thing. Do you know what I mean? They're not going to feel like they're missing out. Which when it was said to me, I was like, well, that actually makes perfect sense, because for almost anybody that I know, including myself, that has ADHD, it's it's rarely, we don't ask people to turn the world on its axis. Like, it's usually simple things like, can I wear
Yeah.
headphones at my desk?
Mm,
Can I
mm.
sit somewhere where people aren't walking up behind me? It's not a big ask, but it's something that will benefit everybody. And then you mentioned that you're from a marketing background, so obviously you know a lot then about the various platforms and media and stuff then that's
Mm.
out there. Do you think that that's a good way to provide like tools and information for people who have ADHD to go down that digital route as
Yeah.
well as like the meetups and such, the social side of it?
Forgive me, but my view on that, not necessarily, but my personal view on that is that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, to be honest. If you look at, we talk about the awareness around ADHD, and there has been a huge awareness and from ADHD, particularly since COVID, and
Yeah,
that's been driven by a number of factors. One is the work ADHD Ireland is doing. Um, you'll see in the United States and particularly in the UK, nearly every second celebrity is coming out and saying they have ADHD.
mm,
One of the other things we've also seen is ADHD on TikTok.
yeah,
And what you see there is, there's nearly 20 billion tags on TikTok with the word ADHD. Now, there was some research done on that, and it
mm,
was finding that 51 or 52% of the information was incorrect. Now, the trouble is, unless you're an expert, you're not going to know which is correct and which is incorrect.
true.
So certainly, there is that an awful lot of awareness, and COVID was the other driver as well. So again, that's why we're seeing that huge, increase in awareness for people going, there's something going on in my life, I can't figure it out.
Yeah,
And one we always find, and I know this is a generality, but people with ADHD tend to research it and research it, really, really in depth. So what we're finding is when anybody comes to us and says, I've been looking at this, I think I have ADHD. Generally, they do have ADHD.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a very, very high rate of people, coming to us and saying, I think I have ADHD, and then going off and getting the assessment.
It's not a
And
blase heat of the
yeah,
moment. Yeah, they usually look for. I know I did. I was 2, 3 years before I
mm,
sought anything out, looking in and doing the research. And I had studied psychology before as well, so dug into all the materials deeply before I even went and looked for an assessment. So when I heard that, what you were saying, I heard that for the first time. I was like, duh, well, that makes sense. Of course,
yeah,
if you really think you want to validate it, like anything else, I think if you haven't been able to make sense of it or validate it prior, you want to make sure you've got all the information and you can validate your answer. So, you're not gaslighting yourself, I guess, which can
yeah.
happen a lot. Um,
Well, again, just to go back, to the double-edged sword. Now, we're not seeing it in Ireland, but we talk to our counterparts in the UK, and they're sort of seeing an anti-ADHD backlash. And
right.
there's certain people in the media saying it's still made up. You're all just malingerers, lazy, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
So there is that as well. But again, and just for instance, we're doing a conference, mid-October with the ADHD Foundation, and they've sourced a speaker, who has ADHD herself, and she has a new book out. We love the title of the book. It's not a bloody trend.
I love it. Yes. It's that simple. Like, yeah.
There is still that little bit. That's what I said. For me, it's not the ADHD is the biggest challenge. It's the stigma and the perception. So if we can change that, we can change an awful lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the stigma is there in the same volume. It's just taken a slightly different angle now that like
Yeah,
prior it was it's too much sugar, it's bad parenting, it's only kids and men. Then there was
mm,
women as well, and now like you say, it's just you want the attention, you want the accommodations, you want special treatment, you
yeah,
know all of that stuff. And I've seen it all. People are probably less likely to say it to me directly because I know I talk about it all the time, and people aren't as brave when they say it to people that are willing to talk about it kind of in the media as such. But I have family members and friends and stuff that also are neurodivergent and hear it firsthand. My kids have heard it firsthand as well. Thankfully they're equipped to be able to have those conversations and educate too. But it's just the same I find with the same thing with women in tech as well, that when you're the person you become, whether you like it or not, when you have ADHD, you become the person who educates those who don't, as opposed to, because there isn't, like we talked about, campaigns and systems out there so accessible for everybody to see it, that they're already educated. You like it or not, you become the educator among your people or your peers or your colleagues or whoever it is. And in many cases, it's about your experience, or I often talk about my experience with ADHD, because it took a while to become fully aware that it's not the same as even my kids. I've got a 21
Yeah.
year old and a almost 18-year-old, and theirs is the same but different, and which blew my mind, because I'm like, but they're genetically related to me. How can it
Yeah,
be
yeah.
so different? Like, yeah, but so very, very different. So learning to manage each other's, and then even how to talk to each other at home, um, and allow for that, has been a challenge. So it can be difficult for people, for employers, for managers, for partners, for peers to, but I don't know. I always find, ask the question. I'd rather be offended by the question than be offended by you not interested in asking. Do you know what I mean? So I'd rather just let them ask the question.
Well, I mean, this may be not controversial, but people talk about children, and
Mm.
it's a label. You're putting a label on children,
Mm.
and things like that as well. But you get the assessment and you get the label, or we see it more as a signpost.
Yeah,
It's a thing that tells what you have, where to go to get services.
yeah,
But someone would say, and I sort of I know where they're coming from on this, um, and because there can be that challenge when a child goes into the school and says, "Look, I have ADHD," but isn't that better than someone saying you're stupid or lazy?
yeah. I'd have rather that. I can tell you for
But that's what I
sure.
mean. That, it's a
No, I'd agree. I'd agree. Because for me, when I found out that I had it, I promptly cried on the spot when I was told that I wasn't stupid, because I spent 43 years of my life thinking that I was,
well,
even though I was, doing well in my career and I'd done well in just about everything. That wasn't the point. That's not what I thought. And I think, like you say, that does a lot more damage than the label of having ADHD in that sense. I would agree, but I'm sure the other people would feel differently about it as well. I think one of the challenges I'm starting to hear about, which is I just thought of this now, so maybe you won't know the answer to it, but is in different countries there are different limitations on what you can or can't do, because it qualifies as a mental illness, like you mentioned in the beginning, and it made me twitch a bit, because I would say that it is I wouldn't call it an illness. I would say it was different, but then I suppose you can treat it with meds. Anyway, that's not what I was going to ask. What I was going to ask is that in some countries they will put limitations around your life assurance, where your ability to drive, if you want to fly planes or do
yeah,
anything, like they won't allow you to do it because of it. Which I know, I'm older, I don't plan to fly planes tomorrow, but for younger people considering those careers and such, I don't know if there's limitations on the Irish side around that. But do you see that being something that we can change, or is it stigma driven, or what do you think about those kind of things?
I do think like, I mean, for example, in the UK, you mentioned around pilots.
Yeah,
There is a challenge around that. There is, some challenges in Ireland, um, particularly around, some like the armed forces or the guards or places like that. Not a problem, but there's probably not. I mean, 15% or 5% of the population of ADHD. Well, it's reasonable to assume 5% of guards have it, 5%. But
yeah,
I'm not sure the percentage of guards have gone and said, I have ADHD and I'm on medication.
yeah,
So there is those challenges around those type of conditions. And so it is moving the things. Now we have done a little bit of work with An Garda Síochána, and they had developed a university program. So things are changing, but I'm still not sure. People are coming forward and putting their hands up and saying, I
mm,
have this condition. Can I get supports in the workplace? But there is always the bigger question around generalities. And I fully agree with the point you were saying earlier that we would say this when we're talking to employers, and they say genuinely we are talking to to more employers all the time. Is that the accommodations that you put in for someone with ADHD are generally suitable for everybody in the organisation.
yeah,
And the accommodation, like the type of accommodations you mentioned, wearing headphones or not sitting in a busy environment, don't
mm.
cost anything.
No, so super easy to do. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I know, and then like people will say that the productivity amongst people that are neurodivergent can be higher.
Mhm.
I know I find it easier to multitask is a word I would have always used, but for me it's just patterns, and I can do two or three things at one time. But I can do that if I've been given that environment within which to work. I can barely do one thing at a time if I've not,
Yeah.
and I think, who doesn't want you to be able to do more work? That's the way I look at it. Going, of course, they want you to do more work. It seems really simple, but I guess we've a ways to go with some of it yet. When it comes to the current resources that are available, resources and services that are available, what's the most significant shortcoming as far as you're concerned for people that have ADHD?
Well, this, you can come at this from two perspectives. And what makes ADHD a little bit different than other conditions that would fit under the neurodiversity umbrella, just for example, other conditions like autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, is that there is medication that works for ADHD.
Yeah.
Now, we're how would you call it, agnostic when it comes to medication, and it's up to the person, make the choice for themselves, or for their child. But certainly, the research would show that the best outcomes for people that would be moderate or severe with ADHD is a multimodal treatment, which is a combination of medication with behavioral management, speech and language therapy, and OT. And so, being able to access that full range of services is always a challenge for people. And then again, but you say, and then the other side of the coin is, looking at it from a neuroaffirmative perspective, and that it's only seen as a disability because of the way society perceives it.
Yeah.
And if you remove those barriers, well, then and you put in the accommodations for people, like which we mentioned, don't cost. Well, then people with ADHD can live and exist and be successful in the world, without medicalizing the condition. But I still think for some people with ADHD, medication may be part of their treatment going forward. And so it's being able to get in terms of what Sláinte Care, which is the new sort of document around the health service, the right treatment in the right place for the patient. And so again, it's working towards that for adults and children with ADHD is where we'd like to see the health service going over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and it's resources. Then again, it's always an issue. Like, and then when it comes to schools and workplaces, you were saying that you're working more and more with businesses and workplaces now. Do you think what can be done, I guess, to make that collaboration efforts between ADHD Ireland and workplaces and schools better? Or do people reach out to you? Do you reach out to them?
Oh,
Or
yeah, yeah. We're a small organisation in terms of size. We would love to be out there, doing proactive campaigns. But at the moment, forgive me, this week I have 2 talks for organisations. I have another couple of talks next week. We have a couple of talks every week. That adds up, to 75 to 100 talks a year. Nicola in our organisation would be looking after the school side. So we have what we call a school accreditation program. So again, that's just gone through the roof. And so again, we're looking to bring in additional resources for that. But we're only scratching the surface in both. And so again, we are looking to put in, programs so that we can develop what we're doing. And so we can, what we call evidence-based, manualized. And so, when we do go out to talk to organizations, we have this program that has been researched. Now, we do know what we're talking about. Let's be honest about that. But, to be able to give, that it has been signed off, it has been evaluated. And this is how you apply it in your organization, be it a school or an organization. So that's certainly one of the things we will certainly be working on over the next couple of years.
Cool. I remember seeing one of the courses there for the schools to do it, and it was to train like 10 teachers or something, and it was like super cheap for the course. I think it was like a couple of hundred or something like that. And I was thinking myself, like, it would make sense. I've been on the Cushta, my kids are in a Gael school, so the Cushta, the Parents Council, and you'd be fundraising for different things, and to me it would make sense to fundraise for something like that, because it's going to be like, the teachers aren't just there for 1 or 2 years, they're there for often their entire career, so those skills get to be shared for a long time and benefit a lot of children in the future for such a very, very, very small cost for the benefits of it. When it comes to tools and techniques that people with ADHD are using to manage their symptoms and such, is there things that you see people getting more benefit out of than others, or anything that you or ADHD Ireland recommends?
No, again, we don't. And again, this goes back to the point you were saying about yourself and your own family, and everybody's different.
Yeah,
And so, just for example, when we go and talk to organisations, I bring what I call a smorgasbord or a menu.
yeah,
Here's a list of things that you can offer to employees that may work. And for example, what you're saying, right, one of the more common ones is headphones,
yeah,
because an awful lot of open plan offices. But what you find is some people with ADHD like having, the music or the noise cancelling, or whatever it happens to be. Some don't.
yeah,
And you never know till you actually talk to the person and say, what do you want? Now, we do find that is one of the challenges that employers are facing out there at the minute, is because there's so many people, just for example, like yourself, much the same age as yourself, and, we're living, with ADHD for a number of years, didn't know what it was.
yeah,
They then get the diagnosis and they go into the employer and say, look, I've just got assessed for ADHD. I'd like to get some supports. And the employer then says to the person, what would you like? And they go, I don't know.
that happened exactly that way to me when my boss said it. I was like, oh my God, I have no idea. Like,
Yeah,
what is there? Give me a menu and I'll tell you what I can
well,
eat.
that's it. That's why we have the menu. That's why we do it that way. So we have the menu so that, here's a list of items we think will work.
Yeah,
So again, it is this idea of the headphones. And it's, having a boss that understands ADHD and how people work with the condition.
yeah,
There's other things, like there's always the overlap with the other conditions like dyslexia, dyspraxia,
yeah,
information in different formats. Someone with ADHD once said to me, that when the boss comes over to my desk, gives me verbal instructions, they might as well be speaking quantum physics.
yeah,
So it doesn't take the boss any longer to do that into some sort of, speech to text or text to speech thing, and either hand it to them in a Word file so they
yeah,
can read it and keep and refer back to it, or in a little speech file that they can listen to.
yeah. Nice and
It didn't
simple.
take the boss. That's the type of thing you're saying. These type of accommodations don't take any longer, require any more work. It's just doing it differently.
Yeah, and being prepared to think differently.
Yeah.
Like, even for that boss, it probably benefits them to have it written down somewhere as well, so we can all be clear on what was asked and what's expected of somebody.
Yes.
I've been on both sides of it, managing people that have had some that have undisclosed, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew about it, and some who have disclosed and that they're neurodivergent as well. And I found it really interesting to learn what each of them need, what's different, if you know what I mean. Frankly, I always found it really, really fascinating to find the thing that works and then see
Yes.
the notable difference in the individual when they feel supported. It's unreal. It's a real buzz, and the quality of work, the amount of work, and the happiness level is such a retention rate, as we would say,
You're
definitely is boosted by it from there. So for people that are part of the ADHD community, is there something that we can do to make our voices heard more effectively, either collectively or as individuals, um, like around the advocacy side of things?
Yeah.
What can we do?
Well, see, this is one of the, and again, this again more of a personal opinion than an ADHD Ireland an opinion on that, is that last year and over the last couple of years we've seen the Maskey report on into CAMS. We also saw the Mental Health Commission report into CAMS, and the lack of services. My view is that there's no votes in mental health, or there hasn't been any votes in mental health, so there was never any sort of impetus on the government or the system, if you want to call it that, to make those improvements, because why would they they'd spend their money elsewhere.
Yeah,
And we are now getting to the system where the place where there is that concern. And so certainly, I mean, I know just not to timestamp this, but in Ireland here we have a general election coming up in the next couple of months.
yeah,
And so if there's 5% of the population in Ireland has ADHD, when someone knocks on their door, we're obviously the one thing we were talking about yesterday was here's 5 things to ask your local election or your general election candidate when they knock on your door. And when they see it coming into their inboxes as an issue,
yeah,
then we'll start to get it. So it's creating that sort of bottom up grassroots, everybody talking about it, feeling about ADHD, and keeping it on the national agenda where it has been for a couple of years now, and that change then begins to come through the system.
yeah, absolutely. I know we did it here with our local elections as well. And what was interesting to see is that some of the local election candidates were really open about their own experiences with either neurodiversity, or there was one in particular, I think, that had a couple of family members that had ADHD and was willing to talk about it, which I thought was very refreshing
Yeah.
because, especially in politics, there's a tendency to want to toe the line till you get across it
Yep.
and not tell anybody anything that might be different about you. So that was very
Mm.
interesting and refreshing to hear as somebody who'd be affected by it. So when it comes to funding, you talked earlier about there's just simply not enough funding. I don't know that there ever would be to do everything that
Yeah.
ADHD Ireland might want to do. How can that be improved as such? What can you do to work with the government to be able to improve that funding? Is that something we can help with
Oh yeah.
as individuals, or how can we?
Oh yeah. Well, again, I mean, we
Same
have
thing.
a good reputation with the powers that be. If I was to meet Mr. Mary Butler on the street today, she'd say, "Hi Ken, how are things going?" We'd have a conversation.
Yeah.
I'm the HSE. They know me. Let's be honest about that. But when you get that sort of coming from the pincer movement, if you want to call it, coming from both sides, that when they see it in their inbox on, not on a daily basis, but why is everybody sending me an email about ADHD services? Because
Yeah.
trust me, TDs, other lecturers, only are concerned about what they see in front.
Yeah.
You know, if it's coming into their inbox and it's concerned about the local CAM service or whatever it happens to be, then they start doing something about it. So it's getting from the top and the bottom, and that'll produce the answers over the longer period of time.
Yeah. So keep talking about it. Keep advocating for it.
Now, forgive me, this is one of the other challenges that I face in my role as CEO of ADHD Ireland, is that, and then again, when I do talk to, I was talking to some professional bodies last week, and they were talking about a solution, to solve, one of the log jams in the system. And, there was an awful lot of IR issues and, funding issues around this. I'm back in table. I want it now.
Mm.
And I will continue to do that for, in terms of ADHD. We want the service, we want it now. Just go figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the real politics is, I'm afraid, things take a little bit longer than that.
True. But I imagine that if we lift off the pressure, then it gets bumped down the list. Like, isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah.
Who shouts loudest? We were talking about campaigns earlier and the lack of them, I guess, in Ireland. Have you ever seen any kind of globally or online or otherwise that you've found really good around the ADHD side of things?
I haven't seen any public awareness campaigns, that I'm, in terms of around, like you see the campaigns for Freeman like an organisation here in Ireland, the road safety campaigns do, those type of public service announcements. So again, we'll be looking for something like that. But what you find is that it really is being driven, not saying by organisations like ADHD Ireland, but there's organisations in the UK, there's a range of organisations across Europe, the United States, and what you find is that particularly as you go further east in Europe, there tends to be less services and less awareness. And so it's, trying to find, because, my view is that, ADHD is genetic, so it's 5% of the population in Ireland or Croatia.
Yeah,
And so again, it's, getting in the quality of service for everybody with ADHD
yeah,
would be beneficial for, global humanity, to be honest. And so it's trying to get to a position like that. But, I would see ourselves, like in Ireland, while the organisation was, founded and set up and started 40 years ago, it's only in the last sort of 7-8 years when we have been getting funding from the HSE that has allowed us to grow, to bang the drum, to be honest. And, in fairness to the HSE, they understand that we have a role to do in that.
mm,
And, if we need to be criticise the HSE, they don't. I've never got a phone call from the HSE saying, "Ken, don't do that again." Or what are you talking about there? And so again, they understand they have their role, we have their role. Hopefully, we're all trying to do something, and that makes life better for people with ADHD in the long term.
yeah, absolutely. And I always say when you're speaking the truth, there isn't really anything
Yes,
people can give out to you about. You're not.
yeah,
That's what you speak to, the truth in your experiences and the people that you represent as well. Like, so it's easy to stand by it when it's true. You know.
yeah.
Um, that's been really interesting, Ken. I've really quite enjoyed that. But before we finish up, is there any parting words that you want to share or anything else that you'd like to cover today?
again, just I mean, looking at not particularly just adult services, but looking at it in the global things, and there's been a lot of international research done on the socio-economic impact of ADHD as a condition. And when you take those figures and you sort of extrapolate them and apply them to Ireland, you're looking at somewhere around 1.8 to 2 billion per year in lost productivity, whatever it happens to be, in Ireland every year. Not once off, every year. The socioeconomic cost of it, adult ADHD is about that. And so again, when you look at that, and then the inequality of services that has been there over the years, and the challenges for people, and one of the things about CAMS is because they're understaffed, and they've been understaffed for 10, 12 years now, is that they operate on the basis of priority, and so that's understandable from their perspective. But when a child comes in with ADHD, they literally get put on another waiting list. So it's trying to remove these inequalities from the service. And where we come from, or particularly I come from, an ADHD island, ADHD is primarily genetic, so it's part of the human condition. And as long as there's been humans, there's people with ADHD.
Yeah.
And so again, on that basis, there should be a quality of service. And I think it's a rights-based issue. And because it is a rights-based issue, and it is based on figures that we can show, that the parity argument will over time win through. Right as might. That in terms that it is based on something that should be provided for services. So I see ourselves winning in the long run, but not necessarily in the next couple of years.
No, I think personally, I feel like sometimes it's bumped down because it can be medicated, as opposed to I guess any other neurodivergent disorder. But and the thing I think that's important to know, it is a protected medical
condition,
isn't it? Yeah. So if anybody is asking for provisions or does feel like they're being, I guess, there's any bias against them or anything like that in the workplace as a protected medical condition, they have the same rights as anybody else would want, which is important to know too, because I didn't even know that until about 6 months ago, where I happened to come across it by accident. And it's, I think that helps me, and I'm sure it helps other people with regards being more vocal about it then as well. Thank you so much, Ken.
My pleasure.
Time. And I'll talk to you again soon.